high in the rarefied atmosphere of the Siskiyou mountain range, a thick white substance oozes its way, finding its limitations within the boundaries of an irregular-shaped impression. An impression 17 inches long, 7.5 inches wide by 3/4 of an inch deep, formed in the surface of an old logging road. An impression humanoid in appearance, and yet too big, too deeply embedded in the old road to be human. The white substance is plaster of Paris. The man pouring it is Roger Patterson, a man whose life is dedicated to proving the creature that made the track is both real and alive.
I'm Al Diatley, General Manager of the Northwest Research Association. You know, we often think of pioneers as the people that settled this country with ox team and covered wagons, moving into the wild and primitive land. But a pioneer can be anyone who seeks out experiences in a new field. The astronauts are pioneering outer space, going to the moon, and then on to who knows. But right here on this planet, there are many new and strange things man has yet to learn. The Northwest Research Association, led by the field guidance of Roger Patterson, is pioneering what may well be the most significant scientific find in history. I would like to explain to you people about what the association did when they first acquired this film footage of the Bigfoot creature you're going to see tonight. On October 20th, 1967, Roger Patterson, on an expedition sponsored by Northwest Research Association, did film on 16mm colored film the first actual photos of one of these creatures. When we got the film back here to the headquarters, we studied it, looked it over, and immediately got a hold of the president of the University of British Columbia College. Now I imagine you wonder why we would take this film to Canada. Primarily, it was the reason that this is the only educational institution that is actively studying the existence of these creatures. After our 4-day stay in Canada, working with the anthropologists, the zoologists, and the likes, we then went directly to Hollywood, California. We took this film to Universal Pictures, had their people study the film, look at it, and give us in writing what they thought. Their report came back that they do not feel that this film could be faked in any way, shape, or form. The next stop was Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian Institute. There we met with Dr. John Napier. He is the head of the Biological Research Department of the Smithsonian. With him, Dr. Raitt, who is a head of the Geological Surveys of the United States, he's employed by the United States government, and many, many others, they put our film through the third degree again. From the Smithsonian Institute, we went to the Yerkes Primate Center in Atlanta, Georgia. The Yerkes Primate Center is an organization that is run by the United States government. It is to study the biological makeup of all primates. After studying with their people for a few days, we were off to New York City. Upon arriving in New York City, we released, for the first time, the pictures of this creature. They were published in the February issue of a national magazine. Now, what I've been trying to tell you is that for 5 months, between the time the film was taken till February of '68, this film was studied by all scientific people that we could get interested in it And you're going to see tonight on this film some of these people's views. Since this time, this February date, up to date, our story and these pictures have been carried in almost every major magazine here in the United States. Also, they've been in publications in Japan, in Europe, and this story now of this find is all over the world. The Northwest Research Association was started by Roger Patterson. It originated a little over 4 years ago and has grown to a membership in excess of 10,000 people scattered in 15 countries from all walks of life. The association's primary objective is to search out, research, and ultimately capture one of these creatures. We get letters from all over the world, from all different kinds of people like you tonight. We encourage each and every one of you to write to us on anything that you have heard or heard from someone relating to this subject. Our staff researchers take these letters, they go out and investigate the situations, and this way we are building a composite files of all the information that can be gathered throughout the Northwest. Here's an interesting thing I'd like to show you people. This is a leading publication here in the United States. Russia claims 300 sightings of the abominable snowman. Here, let me read this to you. Soviet scientists are so sure Darwin's missing link is alive somewhere in the Caucasus. They're sponsoring a 1 million square mile hunt for the thing, going all out after the biggest anthropological prize in history. Now you can see we're in that same situation again. We are competing with the Russians. Here at the Northwest Research Association, we are going to be number one. With all the staff we have, with all the men in the field that we have, I'm sure it's going to be a very short time until we have a living specimen. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the show you're going to see tonight. This show was produced by the British Broadcasting Company. It is graced by having the narration on this film by Dr. John Napier. The film was made in England. Most of the footage was shot here in the United States. You will see that we have tried to air this subject in a very fair way, showing you some scientists that agree with us and some scientists that tremendously disagree with us. I think as you continue through here, keep the air in mind, keep the thought in mind that here in the 20th century, most all of us feel that we know just about everything. But you have to remember that Christopher Columbus thought differently. So as we go on down through this film, I want you to remember and think about your expert scientific witnesses that you're going to be listening to. Think about the ones that are on our side, so to speak, or believe in our feelings or believe in our evidence that we have showed them. And remember that Dr. Napier is the expert. Dr. Raitt, when he will tell you about how these creatures got to North America, he is the expert as far as the United States government is concerned. As you can imagine, an association the size of this one, doing the project that this one is working on, takes funds to operate. The Northwest Research Association generates funds such as showing this film tonight. We also have memberships available for $6 a year. This membership entitles you to a copy, a 5x7 picture of the actual creature taken out of the 16mm film that Roger filmed in Northern California, a membership certificate showing your membership in our association, 4 bulletins a year showing, keeping you up to date on just exactly what we're doing, everything that's going on. Also, we have available what we call Volume 1. This is primarily a scientific magazine or bulletin. It's what the scientists think about this subject. Also, the association has available this book authored by Roger Patterson. He is the expert in this field. Do abominable snowmen of North America really exist? This book is compiled out of the 8 years that Roger has researched this subject. It tells his views. It leads you up through the mountains, through the expeditions. It's very, very interesting reading. This book has been well acclaimed wherever it's been available. Now, these things I've just explained to you, if they're not available in this area, just write to Northwest Research Association, Yakima, Washington. Or if you forget that, just Bigfoot, Yakima, Washington. And we will forward you this bulletin explaining how you can get these things that I've talked to you about tonight. Now, in closing, I'd like to read you one thing out of Roger's book. It probably tells Roger's true feelings better than any way I could describe them. And I quote, "He who seeketh long enough and hard enough will find the truth, whatever the truth may be."
This is the Komodo dragon, thought for centuries to be a mythical monster, but it wasn't discovered until 1912. The giant panda, the first living specimen, wasn't captured until 1936. The okapi was also believed not to exist until 1900. In the last 100 years, 3 legends come to life. Are there any left?
I'd never seen anything like this before. Stood maybe 7 feet high and had hair all over it.
I've heard my parents and different ones talk about him. They have a name for him, Le Kitlega. That's what they call him.
You could actually holler at certain times of the year, and this thing would answer with a guttural tone.
He was an extremely tall giant. His legs seemed to be long for the size of his body, even though he was tall. Giant strides.
Abominable snowmen. Abominable snowmen, as far as we in the Western world are concerned, live in the Himalayas. But the evidence for their actual existence is pretty unscientific, pretty tenuous. We have footprints, eyewitness accounts, and a few odd and rather doubtful skull caps. The image that's come down to us of the shape of these creatures is rather like this. They're usually depicted as big, hairy, heavily chested creatures with long arms, short legs, rather ape-like in proportions, with a crest on the top of the skull and a big toe that sticks out separately from other toes. It's a surprise for most people to learn that legends of the abominable snowmen and their kind occur all over the world, and including, of all places, North America. Now, perhaps it shouldn't really be a surprise, because wherever you get snowman legends, you get areas of wilderness, particularly mountain wilderness. And mountain wilderness is something that North America has plenty of. The west coast of America is characterized by vast blocks of mountain ranges running generally in a north and southerly direction. They form a barrier between the Great Plains of North America and the orange groves of the Pacific coast. Now, California, to most people, is the sophisticated Sunset Strip from San Francisco to San Diego, But in fact, California's 160,000 square miles is largely uninhabited mountains and deserts. North of California, the state of Oregon is even more of a wilderness. Only 2 million people live in its 100,000 square mile area. Further north still is Washington, a state the size of England, again, much of it wilderness. Across the 49th parallel into Canada, the wilderness continues, with its spectacular forests, its snow mountains, and its vast waterfalls. This is all Bigfoot country, much of it unexplored and unmapped. When one realizes this country has really only been open to settlers for a little over 100 years, and that most of the population live on the coast and in the fertile valleys of the low coastal mountain ranges, it's not really difficult to accept the possibility that creatures unknown to science could live there in perfect solitude and safety. That the potential for even quite a sizable population of big feet is there, nobody would deny. But of course, this is not any sort of a proof that such creatures exist. Into this wild and empty Bigfoot country has come rather an unusual cowboy leading a rather unusual posse. His name is Roger Patterson, and for 8 years he has led similar posses into the wilderness in search not of rustlers or bad men, but on the trail of the Bigfoot.
Hi, I'm Roger Patterson, and I'd like to tell you how I got started in this exciting adventure and a few of the things that have happened to me. Have you ever read something or heard a story and wished you were part of it, but yet it seemed way far off? I guess that's the way I felt when I read an article in True magazine in 1959. The story was written by a world-famous zoologist, Ivan Sanderson. It told of huge human-like tracks that would mysteriously appear on logging roads in the mountains of northern California. These tracks would lead up to steel culverts and full 50-gallon drums of diesel oil. And then, to the amazement of the logging crew, the tracks would carry away the drum or the culvert, which would weigh well over 500 pounds, and then throw it over into a canyon. The article went on to tell of giant creatures that bounded across logging roads in front of the loggers as they would come down the mountains at night. A wild story. But I began pondering the thought, could there possibly be subhuman creatures roaming the mountains of northern California? Impossible. And yet I was intrigued. I began talking to anyone that I thought would listen. Some were real interested, but mostly they laughed and said, "Roger, what you need is a long vacation. You're going nuts." Well, after I heard that too many times, I decided they were right. So I took that long vacation right up into the mountains of northern California. A friend of mine, Rod Thornton, went along, mostly for laughs, however, but he soon changed his mind because this whole thing turned into pretty serious business. We talked to a lot of people, including Jerry Crew. He was a cat skinner, or a cat driver, that Sanderson had mentioned in his article. Jerry had found huge human tracks on many occasions around his equipment. The way the tracks sank into the soil, he was sure that whatever made them tracks weighed at least 700 or 800 pounds. Since that first trip, I've covered a good many miles, 1,000 miles, researching on this subject. It's been a long, hard uphill battle, but one more rewarding I can't possibly imagine.
Patterson's travels through the vast and sometimes unexplored regions of the northwestern Canada have taken him into areas where man seldom ever sets foot. Patterson's mode of travel astride a sure-footed mountain horse as he looks for evidence of Bigfoot has some big advantages over foot travel. Not only can he cover a great deal more area, he's also free to keep a watchful eye on the surrounding terrain and still not be so fatigued at the end of a day that he can't put all of his findings together in note form. All of this makes the reliable horse a must on most of Patterson's expeditions. Dogs have been used with some degree of success. However, Patterson feels from past experience their future use will be limited to leash dogs. Patterson, in interviewing hundreds of people who have actually sighted these creatures, recalls one that's a standout. It comes from the northern part of Oregon, where logging operations have recently penetrated a heretofore untouched wilderness area.
Mrs. Higgins, the first time I talked to you, you mentioned that you had seen some tracks up in this area. Could you explain to me a little bit about what you've seen?
Well, yes, we were traveling, actually we were walking along a road in an area about 15 miles above Estacada, up in what they call Lookout Springs country. We were going up to look at a cabin, and as we were walking along, we came onto these tracks. We actually didn't think too much about them at the time, but as we walked along, we realized that they were different than anything we'd ever seen, and they just seemed to be coming right down the road. We were traveling in the opposite direction, and we traveled along for quite a little ways, probably a mile, and the tracks were still there. And as it was getting towards evening, we turned and decided to go back because we weren't going to get to our destination before dark. So we had about 3 miles to go. We went back down to the Jeep and went on home. But after we got home, we got to talking about it and really realized it was something strange. So we went back the next morning, took our Polaroid and a ruler and went up and got to checking around a little bit. We found that the tracks were between 16 and 18 inches in length, and that he had stepped, whatever it was, I say he, had stepped 67.5 inches on his stride, and he didn't appear to be running, just seemed to be walking along at a leisurely pace, and went along for about 1.5 miles down the road. And then when he took off the road and went down into the canyon, he just stepped off 7 feet right down over the hill, just an even nice 7 feet, and then continued on with his other stride down over the hill. And where he went, I don't know.
Has there been anybody else up in this area that has either found tracks or possibly seen one of these creatures?
Yes, since we found these tracks, a logger has come forward to say that he has not only found tracks but has observed some of these creatures while they've been feeding and while they've been traveling around up in the hills here.
Northwest Research Association feels fortunate to learn of this sighting. However, the name of this person is being withheld at his request.
Well, last fall, I was out working in the mountains, and the weather was real cold at that time. It had been foggy, and the east wind had come in, and the fog and rain and stuff had froze on the trees and quite windy and noisy. And I was cold, so I walked down a trail quite a ways, about 1 mile or so, and coming around a bend, the first thing I noticed was 3 rocks turned over. they weren't wet. So thought it seemed odd. But I went on a short ways farther and was walking along a ridge, and as I come to somewhat of an opening, why there was a bunch of rock there, and there were 3 animals there, and they were all hairy, built like humans, and was a large one, heavy in the shoulders, and another one there, not quite as large, and then a real small one. And the 2 larger ones seemed to be picking up the rock, and they would smell of them, each one, and then they would lay it down in a pile. They'd just creep over a little ways farther and pick up another one, smell a bit, and reach back and lay it in this pile. Then they'd move on, make them another pile. And they did this for a few minutes. And then one of the larger ones seemed to find what he was looking for, and he dug real fast down into this rock pile. He's moving awful large boulders. Boulders it'd take one man to pick up. He was moving with one hand easy. And then when he got down there a ways, he seemed to find what he was after, and he brought out a grass nest, and it seemed to have some small rodents in it. And him and these other 2 animals ate the rodents, and he just ate them raw. And about that time, they seemed to come to attention the fact that they had smelled me or something, and took off. They just 2 or 3 steps, and they were gone right now. Went back to where I was working, and the next day I went back and looked for tracks. I couldn't find any real tracks, but I did find one heel print and one toe print. But other than that, I couldn't find any sign of it. The one thing that I did notice when they picked up the rocks were that they used their hand without their thumb. They picked them up with the 4 fingers, and as they would smell of them. These animals were different from what I'd ever seen. They had long hair. Well, the male had real long hair on it, and it was kind of kinky and ragged, or curly and ragged. He was a dark brown. The female had shorter hair, and it was more of a red or a lighter brown. These animals walked on their hind feet. They definitely weren't bear. I've seen lots of bear in the brush, but they weren't bear.
People ask, what do these things really look like? Well, you just heard one eyewitness account, but to give you an even clearer picture, I've drawn a life-size illustration of what a full-grown male would look like. This drawing is based not only on my observations of one at close range, but of hundreds of descriptions of people throughout the Northwest. Notice the flatness of the nose, the massiveness of the jaw structure, and the thin lips. No neck at all. This is something that all of the sightings have reported to have. Very little neck. About this particular creature here would be about 3.5 feet across the shoulders and about 9 feet tall. Body covered completely with hair. The arms are longer, a little bit in proportion than most humans, and going on down to the feet, They are big feet, but in proportion to the size of this creature, they're not that big. A creature this big would leave a track about like this one over here. This is one of the tracks that I found and made a cast of up in Humboldt County in Northern California. Here are some others that I found over the years.